Picture the sheer, deafening roar of an F-15 Strike Eagle, a multi-million-dollar apex predator of the sky, suddenly reduced to a fiery comet tearing through the bruised purple dusk of the southern Iranian desert. Imagine the frantic, adrenaline-soaked terror in the cockpit as the warning alarms scream, illuminating the pilot's face in a ghostly, flashing red light. The violent jolt, the smell of burning wire and jet fuel flooding the oxygen mask, and then the deafening silence of the desert floor rushing up to meet them as the ejection seat fires into the unknown. This is not a movie script. This is not some speculative fiction to keep you entertained. This happened today. The skies over the Middle East are raining fire. Helicopters are being swatted from the heavens. American pilots have been marched into captivity, and the very first boots-on-the-ground firefights have erupted in the sand. The conflict we were all told would remain a surgical, distant operation has just violently spiraled out of control, and the global shockwaves are rippling out faster than the news cycle can even begin to process them. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking this is just another headline, another geopolitical chess match that will resolve itself before it touches your daily life. Honestly, even I can hardly believe the sheer scale of what I am looking at right now. The escalation is happening in real time, minute by minute, and the dominoes are falling with a terrifying momentum. But before we dive into the burning wreckage in the Iranian desert, before we dissect the absolute nightmare scenario unfolding for the American military, I need to pull you back to reality for a second. Because while the masses are staring entirely at the explosions overseas, something incredibly dark, incredibly insidious, has just been quietly slipped through the back door right here in Europe. I need to show you an extremely explosive change to the German conscription and military service laws. A change so massive, so quietly suffocating, that it sent a cold shiver down my spine when I read the fine print. This was pushed through silently, completely under the radar, while everyone's eyes were glued to the foreign wars. The Berlin newspaper published a tiny, almost invisible report with a headline that should be a blaring siren for every free citizen. It read, "New conscription rule. Young men are no longer allowed to leave Germany without explicit permission." Let that sink into your mind for a second. Since the 1st of January, every single male citizen between the ages of 17 and 45 is now legally required to obtain formal bureaucratic permission from the career center of the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, if they want to leave the country for longer than 3 months. It does not matter if you are planning a semester abroad to study, taking a lucrative job offer in Switzerland, or just going on a prolonged backpacking trip across Asia to find yourself. You are now property of the state, and your movements are subject to their approval. And here is the truly terrifying part. This obligation is now permanent. It applies right now, today, in what is officially supposed to be peacetime. Previously, this kind of draconian travel restriction only applied during an official state of tension or a declared state of defense, meaning a concrete, immediate military threat where tanks are literally rolling toward the borders. But no, this monumental restriction of human freedom was quietly activated under the disguise of a routine military modernization act. It was largely unnoticed, previously only whispered about by a few obscure outlets, before becoming the ironclad law of the land. Honestly, my friends, this is unfathomably extreme. This is a massive structural restriction of our fundamental freedom of movement, and it is being implemented before a single shot has even been fired on European soil. Why on earth would the government do this right now? Well, officially they will stand at their podiums and point their fingers to the east. They will talk about the big bad Russian bear that is supposedly going to march across the continent tomorrow morning, and they will tell you with a straight face that we simply must be prepared. They will use the language of patriotism and security to justify putting a lock on the door. But if you look past the political theater, if you look at the raw, bleeding numbers, the unofficial reason becomes glaringly, painfully obvious. There is a mass exodus happening right now, a silent, desperate flight of the middle class because the system is completely collapsing under its own weight. We are stumbling through our third consecutive year of deep, grinding economic recession. We are facing unmitigated mass migration, the looming phantom of a wartime economy, and an absolutely crushing, soul-destroying level of taxation. Think about it. We already suffer under some of the highest tax burdens on the entire planet. Our government just recently pulled $1.5 trillion in special debt out of thin air, and yet the coffers are empty. The infrastructure is crumbling. Now they are even floating the idea of raising the value-added tax again. The system is fundamentally broken, and the people who actually keep it running, the highly educated, the skilled workers, the entrepreneurs, they are packing their bags. They are fleeing a sinking ship, taking their capital and their minds elsewhere, while the country is simultaneously flooded with millions of new dependents relying on state welfare. The government sees this. They are terrified. They know that if the productive class leaves, the whole house of cards comes crashing down. So, what do? They build a legal wall. They implement a mandatory military reporting requirement just to step outside the borders. And mark my words, this is only the preparation phase. This is just the mandatory reporting of your departure. Shortly after this, once the infrastructure is in place and the public is sufficiently numb to it, the actual exit bans will arrive. We are being psychologically and legally conditioned to be locked inside our own borders. It is getting incredibly serious. And hey, from the cold, calculating perspective of the state, an exit ban is incredibly practical right now, especially with the Iranian war exploding. Because if this ground offensive sparks a global conflict, if dirty bombs start flying and alliances are dragged into the abyss, an exit ban ensures they have a captive population ready to be drafted and sent straight into the meat grinder. Why do the architects of power always build the cage before they declare the emergency? It is because true political control is never seized in the midst of chaos. It is quietly legislated in the shadows of distraction. Power operates on the fundamental assumption that the public will trade their invisible freedoms for the illusion of safety, right up until the moment they reach for a door handle and find it locked. When a society's foundation is rotting, the state does not fix the foundation, it locks the exits. It forces you to ask yourself, at what point does civic duty become state ownership? At what point do you stop being a citizen with rights and start becoming a resource to be managed, counted, and eventually expended? And that is exactly why we need to pivot immediately back to the absolute inferno raging in Iran, because this is the catalyst. This is the match that could ignite the draft they are preparing for. This morning, I told you the initial rumors that Iran had successfully shot down an American F-15 fighter jet. Predictably, the U.S. government and the Pentagon came out swinging, denying everything, dismissing it as enemy propaganda. But the truth has a funny way of rising from the ashes. We now have the first visual evidence, the actual wreckage. Pictures are flooding in, showing the twisted, scorched debris of an American warplane scattered across the unforgiving Iranian terrain. Over the southern part of Iran, the sky has been buzzing with frantic American activity. Two highly specialized American rescue aircraft were spotted desperately searching the area. An HC-130 Combat King, an aircraft specifically designed for combat search and rescue, was seen flying dangerously low over the jagged landscape of southern Iran, risking enemy fire just to scan the ground. Shortly before that, an MH-30 Pavehawk rescue helicopter was visually confirmed hovering over the Kogaluya and Boyer Ahmad province. You do not send these specific, highly vulnerable aircraft deep into hostile airspace for a training exercise. These are sent for one reason and one reason only: to extract downed pilots who are hiding in the dirt, praying for salvation before the enemy finds them. Iranian state media wasted no time. They started publishing a barrage of high-resolution images of the wreckage. And these are not just random pieces of scrap metal. The images clearly show the distinct rear tail section and other undeniable structural components of an F-15 Strike Eagle. If you zoom in on the debris, you can clearly see the tactical markings of the 494th Fighter Squadron of the United States Air Force. This is a unit that is normally comfortably stationed at RAF Lakenheath in Great Britain, but was quietly deployed to the Middle East over the past few months as tensions began to boil. You literally just have to put two and two together. Yesterday, highly classified recovery drones were spotted circling the exact same area, searching for the crash site. Today, the Combat King rescue planes are caught on camera skimming the mountains, and now the physical photos of the torn metal bearing U.S. Air Force insignia are out in the open. For me, and for any rational observer, the reality is brutally clear. The fighter jet was blown out of the sky, and the administration is desperately trying to throw a blanket over a raging fire to save face. But look at how the mainstream media is playing this game. Look at the absolute audacity of the German tabloid Bild. They published an article essentially saying, and I quote, "This speaks against the jet being shot down. The USA has so far not confirmed any loss of a fighter jet." The U.S. Central Command wrote on X regarding another Iranian claim that all U.S. fighter jets are accounted for. Wow. I honestly almost fell out of my chair laughing if it wasn't so tragic. The media is seriously arguing that the jet couldn't possibly have been shot down simply because the American military has not issued a press release confirming it. What an absolute joke of journalistic integrity. Honestly, the US government is lying through its teeth right now. They lie about the loss of their own aircraft. They lie about the casualties. They lie about the strategic failures, all to maintain the illusion of absolute invincibility for the folks watching at home. They will deny the sky is blue if it helps them win the news cycle. Why is it that the more blatant the lie, the more eagerly the establishment media swallows it? We live in an era where truth is no longer defined by physical evidence, by twisted metal in the desert, or the desperate flight paths of rescue helicopters. Truth is now whatever the highest authority types into a press release. This is the dark psychology of mass manipulation. Governments know that if they deny reality with enough confidence, a significant portion of the population will ignore their own eyes just to avoid the terrifying discomfort of realizing their leaders are completely out of control. It begs the question, if the institutions designed to protect the truth are complicit in hiding it, how do we ever hold power accountable when the body bags start coming home? Because the reality on the ground is getting so much darker than a crashed plane, it is becoming a human tragedy. An ACES-2 Advanced Concept Ejection Seat, the exact model used in the F-15 Strike Eagle, was just discovered by local Iranian residents in the southern desert. The seat was empty. The parachute had been deployed. The current location, the physical condition, and the status of the pilot and the weapons system officer are entirely unknown to the American public. But the whispers coming out of the region are blood-curdling. There are widespread, terrifying reports indicating that one or both of these American crew members have already been hunted down and captured by the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. God, just imagine the sheer visceral terror of that moment. You are falling from the sky into enemy territory, cutting yourself out of a parachute, armed with nothing but a sidearm and a survival radio, knowing that hundreds of hostile troops are rushing toward your exact coordinates. This is rapidly turning into an absolute nightmare for Donald Trump. Finding the ejection seat empty on Iranian soil is the ticking time bomb of his presidency. The Iranian state news agency Tasnim has officially declared that their armed forces have taken the American pilots into custody. If the Pentagon is forced to confirm this, it means the United States has just lost a multi-million-dollar warplane and its crew deep inside Iran. These are the very first American prisoners of war in this new, escalating conflict. From this second forward, every single military and political decision Donald Trump makes in the next 24 hours has become exponentially more complicated, more dangerous, and more compromised. This is the ultimate propaganda disaster. From a psychological warfare standpoint, captured American soldiers being paraded on foreign television is the absolute worst-case scenario for any sitting president. It hands the Iranian government a massive, unyielding lever of extortion. They hold American lives in their hands now, and the American media establishment is going to completely lose its mind today, tearing into the administration's failure. How quickly does human life transform into political currency? The moment a soldier is captured, they cease to be a son, a father, or a citizen in the eyes of the state. They become a bargaining chip, a pawn on a global chessboard, their suffering broadcasted to manipulate public emotion and extract political concessions. It exposes the cold, mechanical heart of international strategy, where the blood of the individual is weighed purely by its impact on poll numbers and strategic optics. We have to ask ourselves, when our leaders order young men and women into the meat grinder of foreign deserts, do they see human souls? Or do they only see acceptable losses in a game they never have to play themselves? But hold on to your seats, because the situation has just breached a whole new level of chaos. Because of these missing U.S. pilots, because of the desperate scramble to reach them before the Iranians did, we have just witnessed the very first direct, boots-on-the-ground combat between the United States and Iran. Breaking reports are coming in right now. According to regional sources, an intense, bloody firefight has just erupted in the southern Iranian province of Khuzestan. We are talking about direct, close-quarters combat between elite special forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and American Special Operations units who were inserted into the country to execute the search and rescue mission. The timeline of this disaster is staggering. Earlier today, reports surfaced that American attack helicopters aggressively opened fire on Iranian military convoys. These convoys were racing across the desert, heavily armed, moving directly toward the suspected coordinates of the downed American pilots. It is blindingly obvious what happened here. The Iranians located the crash site, or the pilot's beacons. They mobilized their ground troops, and Trump panicked. He authorized the deployment of elite American ground forces, sending them directly into the jaws of the enemy to reach the pilots first. It was a desperate race against time, in the blinding dust of Khuzestan, and it culminated in a brutal exchange of gunfire. And this firefight has triggered a catastrophic chain reaction of consequences. Because if Iran is now officially claiming they have the pilots in custody, it means the American Special Forces lost the ground battle. They were either outgunned, outnumbered, or they arrived too late. And in the chaos of that desert shootout, it is highly probable that even more American soldiers have been wounded, killed, or potentially captured. Because the disaster did not stop there, we are now receiving critical, heartbreaking updates regarding the loss of the rescue aircraft themselves. The Revolutionary Guards are not only parading the capture of the F-15 crew after the shootdown over central Iran. Reports are now flooding the wires that a U.S. MH-60 Black Hawk rescue helicopter actually crashed, or was shot down, during the desperate extraction attempt. Meanwhile, a massive KC-130 refueling and transport plane was seen wildly firing off infrared decoy flares in the night sky, desperately trying to evade a barrage of incoming Iranian surface-to-air missiles. My God, the situation is unraveling at a speed that defies logic. The reality for Donald Trump is deteriorating minute by minute, and the walls are closing in rapidly. Sure, in the grand scheme of a multi-trillion-dollar military, losing one fighter jet and one rescue helicopter might not instantly dictate the outcome of a war. But the capture of these U.S. pilots, combined with the catastrophic, highly visible failure of an elite rescue mission, that is the ultimate propaganda victory for the enemy. It shatters the myth of American invulnerability. Now, the political opposition, the Democrats in Washington, are going to smell blood in the water. They are going to mobilize a massive, vicious political campaign against Donald Trump and what they will frame as his reckless, catastrophic military adventurism. And the context makes it so much worse. Just yesterday, in an unprecedented purge, Trump fired dozens of top-ranking military commanders. He dismissed the highest-ranking general in the entire United States Armed Forces. Why? Because those seasoned military veterans looked at his aggressive, unhinged strike plans for Iran and flat-out refused to execute them. They warned him this would happen. They knew the risks. And instead of listening to the experts, Trump fired them to surround himself with yes-men. Now, less than 24 hours later, with American soldiers sitting in Iranian captivity and wreckage burning in the sand, the situation is impossibly critical. It proves to the entire world how disastrously this conflict has been mismanaged before the actual full-scale ground offensive has even officially begun. What happens when absolute power isolates itself from inconvenient truths? When a leader purges the wise, fires the cautious, and surrounds himself only with the echoes of his own ego, disaster is not just a possibility, it is a mathematical certainty. Leadership is not the ability to force others to blindly follow. It is the wisdom to listen when those who know better tell you no. When political survival becomes more important than strategic reality, the innocent pay the price in blood. It leaves us staring into the abyss, wondering, how many more lives will be sacrificed on the altar of a politician's pride before the public demands a reckoning? So here we are, standing on the absolute precipice of a nightmare. Does this humiliation, this capture of an American pilot, push Trump into a corner where he becomes infinitely more aggressive? Will his ego demand absolute retribution, forcing him to greenlight a massive, apocalyptic ground offensive to save face? Or does he look at the burning helicopters, the captured men, and the fired generals and finally realize that this is a suicide mission? Does he finally step back from the brink and call the whole thing off? The world is holding its breath, waiting for the decision of a man who has painted himself into the most dangerous corner imaginable. These events, from the quiet, suffocating legislative traps being set in the halls of Berlin to the chaotic, bloody sands of Khuzestan, reveal a terrifying pattern about human nature. We are witnessing the arrogance of power in its purest, most destructive form. We see governments that view their citizens as collateral, institutions that lie with a straight face, and leaders who would rather burn the world down than admit they made a mistake. It is a profound, chilling reminder that freedom is fragile, peace is an illusion maintained by a thread, and history is shaped not by justice, but by the ruthless calculations of the powerful. Watch the skies, watch your borders, and ask yourself what price you are willing to pay for the decisions made in rooms you will never be allowed to enter.